Once upon a time, in a land not so far away, on March 25th, 1947, there was born a beautiful princess. Her name was Mary Ruth MacDonald. Mary was the fifth child born to Travis and Jenny MacDonald. She was born to a family that would eventually include 6 daughters and a son. Mary was pure sunshine and her daddy's favourite. Her older sisters and brother thought she was the prettiest baby they had ever seen. Now, to look at this family, you would not think that Mary was a princess. The tiny house they had lived in at 320 El Paso in Modesto, California, certainly would never have been mistaken for a grand palace. Jenny had built the house herself, out of materials she had gathered while Trav was across the world, fighting for freedom during World War II. Although the house was small, it was filled with lots of love. It was filled with love between parents and children, but mostly it was filled with an overwhelmingly pure love of God. This beautiful atmosphere was the perfect environment for raising a little girl who loved God supremely. As a child, Mary often rode along in the back seat of the family car as it squealed around the hairpin COD corners and was filled with her warm sense of security when she saw her daddy reach over and put his arm around Mama. She knew that Daddy loved Mother, and all was well, regardless of whatever else was going on in the world. Travis and Jenny raised their 7 children with a sense of eternal destiny. Their home was a gathering place for young and old alike. And Jenny knew how to take a little bit of nothing and make the most delectable meals, and these were often shared by new converts or young people. Trav drove the Sunday school bus every Sunday morning, and most of the time Mary, her sisters and her brother would ride along as he picked up the children on his route. Many mornings, Mary would come flying out of the house carrying her shoes, hair blowing in the wind, and race down the driveway. Panting, she would climb onto the bus and sink into the seat behind her daddy. It was the highlight of her week to ride the bus, picking up the Sunday school kids with her daddy, but she knew that when she heard it fire up on those Sunday mornings, she better skedaddle. When Mary was very young, she received the gift of the Holy Ghost, the most amazing experience of her life. Mother and Daddy worked hard to instill a love for Jesus with unforgettable all-night prayer meetings and countless Bible studies. Mary was an eager disciple at a young age when she developed a prayer life of her own and a walk with God that has never once slacked. The MacDonald family lived a life of unparalleled devotion to their Lord Jesus Christ. From the time of their conversions, Trav and Jenny had thrown themselves wholeheartedly into the work of God. Their responsibilities to the kingdom took much time and energy, but they never sacrificed their children on the altar of their ministry. On the contrary, they kept their children as involved as they themselves were. The camp meetings, youth camps, revival meetings, Bible studies, hospital services, and street meetings that this family participated in are innumerable. All of the children sang and played instruments, prayed and taught Bible studies, and knew no other way of living. One year, at youth camp, Mary met a young man, Nathaniel Jackson Wilson. She was 11 years old, a blonde bundle of fun with mischievous blue eyes and infectious giggle. Mary looked across the field, tucked her head, and shyly waved at this handsome, adorable baby doll. And oh, how her heart jumped as he waved back. She knew then she had met her prince, even at their tender young ages. It didn't take long for the letters to begin traveling back and forth between Modesto and Kerman. Nathaniel Jackson Wilson was indeed a prince.
Nathaniel was born on December 6, 1945, to Paul and Vera Wilson. Vera Wilson was a quiet, unassuming woman with a gentle smile. She was honest, faithful, and hardworking. Paul was a steady man. He was a leader in their local church and well respected among the folks of the town. He was devoted to his family and to his God. Nate's young life was forever changed when he received the gift of the Holy Ghost in April of 1958. Suddenly, life had real meaning. To the consternation of his teachers and friends, he immediately began to dedicate his life to Jesus Christ. Instead of playing ball on the school team, he would ride his battered bicycle to his little country church, where he spent many hours in prayer. Gone was the desire for the world and all it had to offer. He had caught a glimpse of the eternal. Winning people to the Lord became his all-consuming desire. He knocked on every single door in the city of Kerman, not just once, but twice, inviting people to church. The change in him was so dramatic that everyone noticed, not just the people who were close to him. One man who lived up the street had become angry at Nate's dedication to the things of God. He felt that Nate's natural ability to play sports could have meant a great career for Nate.
That boy could have put this town on the map.
He would grumble.
But no, that church down there won't let him play ball.
What this man did not realize was that church down there had very little to do with Nate's decision of not pursuing sports fame. It was Nate's complete and absolute devotion to Jesus and his desire to please him that dictated his change of heart. Youth camp at Fraser Park, what a treat. Time away from home and everyday responsibilities was rare and treasured. Wonderful services and powerful preaching. Every young man's perfect vacation. Of course, spending time with friends and meeting new ones was a big part of the fun as well. The day that Nate met Mary was a red-letter day. He was instantly smitten, and soon the fellas were teasing him about the letters from Mary that he carried close in his back pocket like a badge of honor.
Years passed, and time has a way of changing things. Mary grew into a beautiful young lady, gracious, kind, consecrated to the work of the Lord, and talented. And boy, could she sing. When those McDonald kids got up in service, they could sing the glory down. As her parents had taught her, Mary was dedicated in service not only to her Lord, but to others as well. When she was 16 years old and attending Bible college, she would cut up 21 whole chickens, batter them up and fry them so that she could feed a whole Bible college every Sunday afternoon. Everyone clamored in line to get a piece of Mary's fried chicken, and this was in addition to attending morning and evening service prayer and all her other obligations. While attending Bible school, Mary became engaged to what seemed a good fellow. Yet every time she saw that gorgeous Nate walk by, her eyes would follow him, smitten with longing. A brotherly talk from her only brother Mackie soon helped her straighten out the situation.
Now, Mary,
Mackie admonished,
this fella is a good guy, but you really don't love him. You love Nate Wilson. If you go through with this engagement, you're going to miss the will of God. Have some sense, Mary.
Nate was dealing with Mary's engagement to this fella in his own way. Early one morning, very early, around 2 o'clock in the morning, Nate knocked on Brother and Sister McDonald's door. Brother McDonald stumbled down the hall and tripped over the vacuum on his way to the door, wondering who could possibly be interrupting his sound sleep. Nate proceeded to explain to Brother McDonald that he wanted to let him know that he was going to marry his daughter Mary. When Brother McDonald told him there must be a mistake, that Mary was already engaged, Nate assured him that he was aware of this, but that he, Nate, would be marrying her. Brother McDonald told Nate that if he could convince Mary, then that was fine with him, and he yawned and closed the front door. This young whippersnapper was obviously nuts. However, Nate did not have much trouble convincing Mary that they were destined to be together.
In a few short months, a romantic Christmas wedding was planned, and on December 17, 1965, in Modesto, California, Nathaniel Jackson Wilson and Mary Ruth McDonald exchanged their vows. Commitments were given, and they were wed. In her complete adoration for Nate, Mary sang a song, pledging herself to him for always.
Soon after their marriage, the young couple found themselves pastoring a small church in Willits, California. It was a time of great financial hardship for the Wilsons. The salary they received from the little congregation averaged about $2.50 a week. Nate was forced to take a job at Sears and Roebuck in order to support their growing family, for Mary was expecting their first daughter. The house they lived in was really a small shack. It was built onto the back of their rundown church that they were desperately trying to revive. The walls had 2-inch cracks between the siding boards. You could see into the yard in between the cracks in the walls. It was bitterly cold that winter, and food was scarce.
Many mornings, Mary would bundle up as warmly as she could and ride to work with Nate. Once there, she would sit in the car all day long and wait for him to get off of work. There was no company but the Bible and her Lord. But oh, the prayer meetings she had in that car as she waited for her beloved to get off of work. The closer it got to quitting time, the more excited she got. She would sit there with her eyes glued to the door and think,
Any minute now, my baby doll's coming out that door.
There was never a word of complaint or recrimination for their circumstances. Instead, her conversation was filled with expressions of confidence in her man.
Baby, you're the best. I'm so proud of you. I'm so glad I married you.
No matter what came their way, the Wilsons faced it with good grace and high spirits. Nothing got them down. How could it when they had Jesus and each other? Nate and Mary also pastored churches in Downey and Pinedale, California. Financial struggle was always a given as everything they had was poured into the work of God. One evening, there was not a speck of food in the cupboard, and like always in hard times, they knelt beside their beds and started to pray. Soon, there was a knock on the door. Nate stood to his feet and answered the door. There stood a man with bags and bags of groceries. The whole back of his truck was piled high with brown paper sacks. When he asked, "Why are you here? Why are you doing this?" the man looked at Nate and said, "God spoke to me and said you were starving." This man was Nate's father, whom Nate had never complained to nor asked for help. Again and again, God provided for Nate and Mary as they also pastored in Pinedale and Downey.
1972 found the Wilson family accepting the pastorate of a desperately troubled congregation in Flint, Michigan. The church had split multiple times and people were deeply wounded. When the Wilsons arrived, 2 different factions of the congregation were holding services in the building. One group would lock out the other, and the organ player from the second group would push those from the first group off the instrument, declaring, "Now the real service will start." Into this fragmented atmosphere, the Wilsons came, bringing hope and help to troubled lives. Although they were young, they were filled with enthusiasm and courage. Brother Wilson was unintimidated in his preaching and in his leading. Their love for God and the confidence they instilled in the people convinced them that God could do anything.
During their time in Flint, Sister Wilson felt impressed by the Holy Ghost that she needed to dedicate a year of her life to prayer for her precious girls, Rebecca and Sheila. And so, every day for an entire year, she would pack the girls up along with their toys and snacks and go to the church and pray. For hours every day, she prayed for her girls. Along with many other things, she prayed that they would love God and that His hand would be upon them. She prayed that they would have deep convictions and that they would have holiness in their hearts. Those days of consecration and hours of travail are still bearing fruit in the lives of her daughters today. The Wilson home was always the place to go if you wanted to have fun. At one point, when visiting a minister and his wife, Brother Wilson went into the kitchen to make an ice cream cone. The minister's wife followed Brother Wilson into the kitchen, but he pretended not to see her and continued building his cone. 1 scoop, 2 scoops, 3, 4, he piled it high. The cone kept getting taller and taller. Then, as the lady watched in amazement, Brother Wilson took the entire cone and smashed it against his forehead. Ice cream smeared and began dripping all over the floor in his face. Perhaps Brother Wilson had gone a bit mad. She didn't know whether to laugh or not. After all, everyone knew the pressure he was under. To this day, that poor preacher's wife doesn't know what to think of Brother Wilson.
The Wilsons lived in an apartment a little ways from the church, and often they would race home from the services. It seemed that Brother Wilson had always won. But one night, Sister Wilson decided she had had enough. As usual, they raced up the street toward home, and as usual, Brother Wilson edged ahead. Suddenly, he realized that Sister Wilson was no longer behind him. Looking around, he saw that the Oldsmobile headlight bumping across the vacant field adjacent to the apartment complex they lived in. Sister Wilson had found a shortcut. She drove that car like a monster truck, jolting and bouncing through dirt, grass, and debris. Brother Wilson stepped on the gas, whipped around the corner, and came to a screeching halt. She had finally won, although to this day there is still a loud, raucous discussion about who really won, fairness, and who won the most. "Let's party" was often heard as pressures would mount. Out would come the board games and the popcorn, a family tradition. And soon the trials of life will be obscured by the sound of laughter. What couldn't be resolved must be endured, and they determined to endure with joy.
Within 6 years, South Flint Tabernacle had grown from a troubled group of 90 people to a thriving congregation of almost 700 members. They had purchased land and erected a beautiful edifice to house the revival-minded throng of believers. Just by being themselves, loving God and each other, and looking at all the setbacks as setups, they had imparted to the people in Flint the tools necessary for them to continue to live overcoming, victorious lives.
In 1978, Brother Wilson was offered the position of speaker for the internationally broadcast radio program Harvest Time. This prompted a move to St. Louis, Missouri, where the program headquarters was located. Leaving Flint was heart-wrenching for both the Wilson family and their church. The people were fiercely loyal to their pastor, and while they trusted the hand of God that was guiding the Wilsons, their leaving was incredibly difficult to accept. After many tearful farewells, the Wilsons arrived in St. Louis, ready and eager to do the best they could with this new challenge. And do well they did. So well, in fact, that Brother Wilson's superiors became worried. His personal charisma and impeccable character threatened to eclipse their own popularity. Pressure to compromise some of their core beliefs was applied against the Wilsons' integrity. This led Brother Wilson to resign as Harvest Time speaker. Their ministry during this time lives on today in the lives of people who are impacted by their love for God and desire to please Him and not themselves or others.
So what now? Where to go? Packing their young daughters into their van, they began traveling, evangelizing along the way. Their journey took them down familiar roads as they headed back to California. Brother Wilson accepted the vice presidency of the Bible college from which he had graduated 15 years earlier. In the meantime, he began to earnestly seek God about the next assignment in the kingdom. The Lord led them to a tiny congregation in West Sacramento that was in desperate need of godly leadership. In May of 1981, 6 members voted Brother Wilson in as pastor, and immediately the Wilsons took up the challenge. The church began to thrive under the Wilsons' love and care. Brother Wilson's unintimidated preaching sounded a clarion call, and soon people were coming from all over to be a part of what God was doing in Sacramento, California. The small congregation began to grow, and it was evident God was directing the Wilsons' steps. As always, money was tight, and many fundraisers were used to raise capital. A 10-acre parcel of land was purchased at the corner of Bradshaw and Calvine Roads. Although heads shook and tongues wagged, Brother Wilson was certain that God had directed the congregation to buy this piece of property. It mattered not that it was in the middle of nowhere on the corner of a country intersection and surrounded by cow pastures. Nor did it matter that the small congregation numbered less than 100 people at the time of its purchase.
When God spoke, Nate and Mary Wilson listened, and as they had been doing for many, many years, they obeyed. Soon construction had begun, and all participated. The work was a bit unconventional, often done at night by the headlights of the parked cars, being as the men of the congregation had to work days to support their families. With great anticipation, the throng of believers watched the erection of the steel structure that would become their new sanctuary. And then They watched in dismay as it collapsed and fell completely to the ground when the support beams were prematurely removed. The front page article and full-color photo that graced the following day's Sacramento Bee only added fuel to the fire of the criticism that the church and its pastor were facing. This was an ideal time for discouragement to take hold. But as always, the challenge was faced with laughter and hard work, with the charge being led by Brother and Sister Wilson. Brother Wilson's take on the situation was, "Hey, at least they're talking about us. Free publicity." Sister Wilson was not idle at this time. She was at the church as often as the men, and under her leadership, the ladies fed and encouraged their menfolk. They even hung a little drywall, helped with the concrete and painting, and did anything else that was needed. After all of the excitement of building the church twice, at last, on January 1st, 1986, the Rock Church celebrated its first service in their new sanctuary. What a time the little band of warriors had in their blessed new surroundings. The congregation had grown to about 175 members, and revival was in the air.
Sister Wilson had always led by example a life of deep commitment to prayer. But not long after moving into the new building, she felt led to take her teachings a bit further. Thus, ladies' prayer meetings were born. From those humble beginnings of 20 or so women gathering to pray, a ministry that has impacted lives worldwide began. Ladies' prayer meeting with an attendance of hundreds, ladies' retreats, ladies' prayer panels, the Word Conference have all contributed immeasurably to the growth of the Rock Church and the spiritual maturity of its saints. All of the teaching that Sister Wilson received as a child and imparted to her women, serving God, caring for our homes and families, loving our husbands, raising children that hunger for the things of God, sacrificing for the cause of the kingdom through prayer, fasting, and hard work, and of course, doing it all with joy, has changed the lives of hundreds and impacted innumerable families and churches. News of these meetings traveled abroad, and soon Sister Wilson was frequently asked to address congregations and conferences. One day in prayer, she felt the Lord admonish her to focus her efforts at home. She felt that if she began traveling to speaking engagements regularly, her home and saints would suffer. So, in obedience, she curtailed all outside activities and focused on her heartbeat, which were her saints and her family. The sacrifice of public acclaim has paid great dividends, and she has never regretted the decision to give her time to her home and to her church family. Now many of those whom she taught are involved in ministry around the nation, teaching the principles that she imparted to them.
Brother Wilson, gifted in writing, has authored 13 books and a 5-volume theology course, which has impacted ministers worldwide. He is the founder of Apostolic School of Theology, the only accredited apostolic college in the world. The impact of Brother Wilson, always looking for ways to help people become, is one of the 4 founding members of Progress, Strength, and Renewal, a revival meeting of 3,500 with impact resounding still today. He is also one of the 2 founding members of No Limits, the Conference, an annual gathering of revival seekers with worldwide impact. In addition, he is one of the founding members of Pentacon, a worldwide missions endeavor with millions of people being touched by the gospel. He co-founded Alcance Mundial Honduras, International Association of Soteric Counselors, and revived the Conquerors Quartet, himself being the bass singer, with 2 recording projects. He designed and created Hope Corps, a worldwide missions training program which has impacted thousands of people and churches, Helping Children of the World, a non-profit philanthropic humanitarian aid project, and is currently directing the writing of the Premier Bible. Brother Wilson is a world-renowned speaker, frequenting camp meetings, leadership training seminars, and oversees revival crusades.
All of this did not come without great personal sacrifice. For every battle won, for every inch of ground claimed for the kingdom, there was an attack on the Wilsons personally. Rebecca had been diagnosed with brittle juvenile diabetes as a young teen and many times lay at death's door. On one occasion, Brother Wilson stood outside her bedroom door and felt the presence of the angel of death that had come to claim his precious daughter. Through constant prayer, careful attention to her health, Rebecca managed to live the life of a normal teenager. However, soon the late nights of revival and constant activity began to take their toll and her health deteriorated. Many were the times that Brother Wilson would leave from the hospital to keep a preaching engagement or arrive home to find that Rebecca had been admitted once again. Sister Wilson, of course, never left her side, and it seemed that the trial that had come to destroy their family only drew them closer together. In 1990, their daughter Sheila was married to Reverend Miles Young. The Wilsons' lives were filled with much happiness that their youngest child had been blessed with such a talented, gentle teddy bear that was completely sold out to Jesus Christ. A year later, Rebecca was married to Doug Salters, a handsome, godly young man that brought many laughs and a lot of love into the family. They didn't know at this time that this boy they loved so much would give life in the form of a kidney donation to precious Rebecca 15 years later. Much to their delight, Miles and Sheila gave them a grandson, Boston, and a year and a half later, a granddaughter, London.
In 1998, Miles and Sheila gave up the pastorate of a church in Santee, California, and returned to Sacramento to pastor the Rock Church. Brother Wilson's sphere of influence expanded, and he felt the Lord guide him to have Brother and Sister Young come and pastor the Rock Church. He became the bishop, continued to teach worldwide, and continued the intensive process of opening Apostolic School of Theology.
The Wilsons' lives are rich with blessings. The church grew in number, strength, finances, and spiritual health. Their expanded family is the core of their deep-seated happiness, and each member brings great joy. Their grandson, Boston, a rock-solid leader, at 22 earned a master's degree, and their granddaughter, London, a vivacious, godly leader, at 20 earned a bachelor's degree. They have both been a strength of holiness, purity, and love, and a radical commitment to reach the lost, making their grandparents extremely proud. Charity, Heather, Sarah, Boston, London, and Jenna were raised to sell out to Jesus Christ. Brother and Sister Wilson raised their children to be at the center of their lives, and they are no different with their grandchildren. They were and still are their pride and joy. And now, life has entered a new stage with wonderful great-grands, Jude and Jade. Life is always a party at Poppy and Nanny's, and the destination for the family each night. Inevitably, the family will end up sitting around the table with a massive bowl of Nanny's popcorn, attempting to play a game, but spending more time talking and laughing and making forever memories. Dinner at Nanny's with a full spread has been a family tradition. From the 10-month-old to the 70-year-old, all are required to attend, but all are honored to show up. Besides the fact that the food is always superb, traditions are a constant and a part of the family glue. All holidays are vigorously celebrated. The kitchen is always the hub of activity with the smell of Boston's coffee or his delectable creations. Doug's whipping up waffles and everyone scrambles to get one of Miles' homemade pizzas or Julie's pumpkin rolls. Charity tosses her floured biscuits while stirring her fudge. London's rolling out the dumplings, chopping nuts for her pecan pie. All the while, Poppy hoots and hollers. Jenna sings and Jared is eating. Heather's laughing and cleaning and Bebby is taking care of all. And Nanny, well, she loves every minute of it. Oh, what a clamor. Oh, what joy. Laughter and love rings in the Wilson home. Prayer is the foundation of the family. The Bible is a resource for all answers. Loyalty and unity are the underpinning of the love that exudes from one member to the other.
Always reaching for the stars, Brother Wilson received his doctorate in education from Nova University, and yet continues to spend countless hours delving into the masters and achieving higher levels of learning.
His dream of a fully accredited apostolic higher education became reality when he founded, opened, and became the president of the very first regionally accredited apostolic college offering a bachelor's and master's degree, the Apostolic School of Theology, which currently has the largest enrollment of any apostolic school in the world. The groundwork has already been laid for additional degrees which tie both counseling and business to apostolic ministry for greater effectiveness in our world.
The planning stages of construction on yet another new sanctuary, 8520 Bradshaw, were well advanced when once again the shadow of death fell over Rebecca in 2002. It became clear that if she didn't receive a transplant of both kidney and pancreas, that her time on earth would become short. Deathly ill, yellow with jaundice from her malfunctioning kidneys, she would be violently ill for hours every morning. October of 2003 found Brother and Sister Wilson moving Doug and Rebecca into their home in order to adequately care for their precious daughter. Taken to death's door, God gave the family a miracle, and Rebecca received a kidney from her husband Doug, and 6 months later, a pancreas. Ironically, the very day that Rebecca received her pancreas transplant, the walls of the new sanctuary went up. God reigned victorious on this momentous day. How did the Wilsons face death and disease? It certainly merited discouragement and bitterness. For who can watch their daughter die as they give all to the work of God? Anger, frustration, and grief would be very natural reactions. But oh no, this challenge, death itself, was faced with the same manner as all other obstacles. With joy and courage and the ringing refrain, "Let's party, God is good. We may go down, but we'll make it a party and go down laughing." The troops rallied, they prayed, they fasted, they believed, they had utmost faith in their God that He would see them through, and once again, He reigned. Nathaniel and Mary Wilson, 50 years of marriage have been achieved. Laughter, heartache, joy and pain, accomplishments and setbacks, laughter and faith, degrees and schools, buildings built and buildings collapsed, laughter, frustration, children and grandchildren, laughter and tears, forgiveness, success, agony and weariness, laughter, perseverance, books authored and albums recorded, singing and music, a vital part of their existence, patience, persistence, magazines created and corporations formed, projects upon projects, houses and huts, riches and poverty, a failed venture but never defeat, laughter and anger, death and defiance, new languages and crusades, revivals, demonic forces, victorious saints, a few broken hearts, some lost by the way, others rising from the ghetto, a lost child, a prodigal come home, laughter, faithfulness, a broken marriage, a restored marriage, a hurting child, a wounded heart mended, a loved one gone home, a child healed, rejoicing and more laughter, commitment, dedication, precious friends, betrayal, a wagging tongue, a course correction, a new consecration, higher education, simple prayer, more laughter, and miracles upon miracles, laughter, laughter, and more laughter. This marriage of 50 years has seen it all, and yet it remains full of love and laughter. With a tireless devotion to their God, His kingdom, and one another, they have been good and faithful servants, and God has abundantly blessed them.